Today, I'm going to take you through one of the most important things that you need to be doing with your offers and your messaging and your marketing overall. And it's a big, massive chunk of the puzzle that so many businesses that I see out there are just completely missing. And that is positioning. Now, it doesn't sound as sexy as it is. I'm going to break down some super simple concepts for you today so that you can stop losing out on price. And you can stop losing out to the biggest, most well-known competitors in your space. That if you just did a little bit of positioning work, you too would be like my client who closed a $336,000 contract from a completely cold lead that we helped them to reach out to. So let's break that down today. So the first thing you have to understand is that commoditization is not a market problem. It is a positioning problem. And when you lead with price, you just put yourself in a bucket of moving down to the bottom as quickly as possible. Now, I never want to build a company, an offer, or even frankly help somebody with their marketing when the way in which we win contracts is through the cheapest price. And in fact, the client that I'm talking about today, they work in one of the most saturated industries possible, and that is helping people install developers into their projects. There's thousands of these companies. And especially when you are using overseas developers, you'd think that one of the first things that you would do with your marketing is talk about how much cheaper it would be to hire them versus hiring somebody, in North America, let's say. And so all that happens is if you go to the market of, well, we're the cheaper guys to go with, it's just a race down to the bottom. So figuring out what can we do with our positioning. How do we go to the market and actually show that what we do is different so that people can advocate and say yes to us? That is where we have seen a lot of wins with our clients. So there's a really, really great book that you should check out. It is called, the book is by April Dunford. And the book is called Obviously Awesome. And she tells this really, really great story. And I'll give it just a quick version of the story that she told. She's Canadian, so she talks about Tim Hortons. But she basically walks into Tim Hortons. She sees the gentleman in front of her. It's about 8 o'clock in the morning. She's about to go off to do some meetings. And she notices that the gentleman chooses something that really is actual cake. It's got chocolate chips on it. It's a big fudgy piece of cake, but it's been done in the shape of a muffin. And because it's been done in the shape of a muffin, it's now considered a breakfast item. So typically this man is not going to choose something like that, but he's going to choose other things that are more suited for breakfast. But because they went ahead and they called it a muffin and they offered it alongside the other breakfast items, it made this man think, oh yeah, like that's what I'll have. I'll choose that. So really what you have to think about in the way of positioning is that you're not changing the product. You're changing it what people compare it to. And I'll give you another real life example because this is another client of mine who is in the HR sourcing space. And it's actually really, really competitive. And I think this is something that people don't quite understand as well when it comes to B2B sales. The number one thing that holds back B2B sales is the fear that you chose a company that's not going to do the job that you were set out to find and do. So typically in a B2B sales deal, we all know that there are multiple decision makers, but there is one who has been tasked with the job to go and find the solution for the current problem that they have, right? That's the only reason why people are buying, is because there is a current challenge that they are trying to fix, and they need to go and find the contractor, the software, the service, the insert, whatever your product and service is here. That is what helps them achieve whatever they are trying to fix. So typically there's one person who says, this is my job to go and figure out and how to fix this one thing. So when that happens, that's means for you is that if they choose you, being typically the smaller guy and not the most well-known competitor in your space, there is so much at stake for that person, because if your company, your product, your service doesn't help them achieve what they were set out to do, that person's job is actually in jeopardy. So there's a lot of fear that goes into having somebody say, you know what, we should hire you, the smallest, most unknown guy, the one person that we have zero relationship with. And what tends to happen is that the deals go to the biggest, most well-known names in the space, because it's the less riskiest version of them saying we should hire them. So now that you have an understanding of that, when we look at positioning, we really have to find what makes your company incredibly special. What is the one thing that you do incredibly well, better than anybody else, better than all the other solutions that are out there? And sometimes you're not always having to stay in the lane of what is the direct competitor, but all the ways in which they can achieve that thing. Because once you find out this one piece of your software, your service, your product that you do incredibly well than anybody else, that's the story that you need to anchor to. That's where you plant our flag and say, this is the one thing that we're really good at. Once you have an indicator of this is the one thing that we are very good at, you then need to go and find the segment of the market that cares more about that one thing than any other industry, than any other people. Because that's how we allow for these people within the team who are making the decision to advocate for us, to say we should hire these people. So I'll give you a prime example. My client who has the HR sourcing AI tool, when we took them through this research process, their tool did a million different bells and whistles. And let me tell you, when I reviewed this client's sales calls, they would literally spend an hour just going through every single piece of what this tool does. And that's not the way that we advise. And that's for a totally different YouTube on another day. But what we did find was that this HR sourcing tool was incredibly good at sorting through and finding applicants that could help a company meet their diversification quota. So there are industries and companies out there who have a certain quota that they have to make every single year when they are doing their hiring. And so they already have access to a lot of HR AI like sourcing tools. But what we found was that specifically their biggest competitors were not really marketing, nor did we even have the clarity that their tool even had the capability to very easily find applicants that would help them meet a diversification quota. And so when we did more research, we actually found that within the fintech space, that industry was kind of shouting to the rafters that they were not able to meet that quota, and their leadership was pushing very hard that this was a massive gap within their hiring process. So when we suggested to the client that we should niche down and that we should go after this as in our first outbound campaign, that we should first build around within this industry, we were able to help them beat out a massive billion-dollar company and secure a $65,000 contract with a bank. So very, very cool. And that was kicked off a lot of fun things that happened thereafter that we'll share, other details. But I wanted to share that story for the purpose of positioning, because once we found out that the tool was very good at this one piece of the pie, that's really all we had to talk about. We didn't have to talk about all the other bells and whistles and totally muddy the waters and confuse everything. That we just had to have them understand this one piece of what it does and then pick the right segment of the market that would care the most about that, so that they could help them understand, oh, well, perfect. If I use this tool, then that means this issue that I have of us meeting the diversity quota of whom we hire, that problem goes away. And I didn't have that same conversation when I talked to competitor A, competitor B, competitor C, etc. So you can see how this just completely changes the narrative of when you go to the market and you're able to get somebody's attention to let them know what it is that you do. So the next piece that we layer on is that once you have an understanding of, okay, now these are the right people that I should be targeting, that's going to allow me to cut through all of the noise. And now that you have a deep understanding of the problems and challenges that industry is going for, and specifically how you solve for that and the types of outcomes that you can promise, being able to layer on signal-based data just becomes so much easier and so much more fun, because you can get hyper specific in who it is that you reach out to in your campaigns. So we don't just rely on something like a Sales Navigator filter or Apollo filtering or Seamless or whatever tools that you're using to build your list based off of just demographic data. Because if all we're doing is using something like industry titles, locations, company size, revenue, those things are, indicator that that person has the potential to be somebody that we can serve. But it does nothing for us to really understand if that person is in a buying pocket. Are they actually searching for a product or service of what our client has? And that's a really important piece of the puzzle. So when you have great positioning so that you can cut through the noise, the ability for you to set up systems around scraping the entirety of the internet. I'm talking YouTube, podcasts, LinkedIn, Instagram. There's all these different places where we can go and we can say, oh, there's an article about something that our client's product or service solves for. And oh, there's an executive who engaged with that article. That's a pretty important person that we want to have a conversation with, because not only are we picking up in a signal that they engage with it, what we typically see from our research is that these executives will go into a research phase far before they start reaching out to even their peer network, to even internally to find out who can solve this problem for them. They will move into a research phase. So when we're able to catch those people, we're catching them in a buying pocket. And your ability to figure out what qualifies as somebody in a buying pocket is so far better determined when you have proper positioning. Because again, you're really understanding the core challenges that they have and how you can properly position it so that when you do outreach, number one, you're no longer met with a visceral reaction. Why are you reaching out to me? This is not something I even wanted. And you're able to really personalize and figure out the exact messaging that's just going to allow somebody to say yes without them having to know your entire history, all the clients that you work with. There's so much that goes into these enterprise B2B deals. And that client that I was talking you about that had the HR sourcing tool, they'd only ever done 2 deals prior to this. And prior to this positioning work that we had been put through, every time that they had even gotten a meeting, gotten their foot in the door, the amount of scrutiny that they went through to be able to work at the enterprise level was pretty crazy. And it made them feel like we're just never going to get a deal done because we're too new, we don't have enough track record, and these enterprise level companies feel as though they cannot trust us. And so when you layer on proper positioning and you're able to hit to the very core of what you know that they care about, that level of scrutiny is an afterthought. It is not as important when you're no longer having to compete because you're now positioned on a totally different level. So there's a similar thing to when I talked about the $336,000 deal that we did with one of our clients. It was the same thing. They were in this very, very saturated market. And when we were able to really position properly to the right industry and no longer try to compete on price, but compete on the positioning points that made them who they are and what they were able to achieve, we were able to cut through the noise, and that's how we were able to get them a $336,000 deal. So cool. So again, you really have to look at this from, there is demographic targeting where we can just apply some basic filters to understand this person would meet a certain criteria based on filtering. And then there is a signal-based intelligence that uses AI and it uses multiple different platforms that we go and we scrape through. And one of the important things to know too is that when we go through a scraping process of pulling in these signals, we actually only pull back as far as 7 days because again, you're trying to pick up somebody who is in a buying window. We're not trying to pull in people who showed us a signal from 3 months ago. Because if you remember just early in the video when I talked about the need for finding somebody in that research phase, that's the whole purpose of why. So we really prioritize all of our outbound campaigns specifically towards the people who show us a signal. I'm not going to say that Sales Navigator doesn't have its place. We use it as a backup data so that if for some reason that day, as we're running campaigns, we don't have signal-based prospects coming in, we will have Sales Navigator to put us through. But that is a campaign that performs on a completely different level. It is a completely different style of first message because typically when you use something just like Sales Navigator, you're going to be met with a lot of, are you reaching out to me? No, I'm not interested in this. And you can't go with what us marketers call a direct response, meaning I have this thing, do you want to buy it? Versus when you have something that came off of a signal, you can very much go to the market with a direct response because you know that they're in an actual need of what it is that you're looking for. So it's 2 very different styles of ways of running campaigns. What's so cool is that we took this company from having to rely on RFPs to then being able to create their own pipeline, to being able to go from not having any deals done to making these changes. And within 40 days, we were able to get the $336,000 deal. And in fact, that company 2 years later is still running the very campaigns that we help them set up and understand the positioning and the messaging that we've used. So it's very cool to see that when you apply the right messaging and the right signals to the right people, these are the kinds of results that you will typically see. And so when I checked in with the client that day on Slack, they sent me this message and they said, hey, we have a client that has signed a contract for $336,000. We're looking for their developers. And we have a couple more prospects asking questions. Something is working. We're seeing it move. Yeah, no kidding, Emilio. No kidding that something is working. I laughed just to say when I got the message that day. But if you're looking for something like this within your business, we apply a very holistic approach when we work with companies. So we don't just stop at working on the outbound. We will layer in paid strategies in there as well. We will go through your entire sales process to ensure that it is properly primed and ready to convert somebody that comes in from a cold audience, because closing something from cold is very different than closing something from referral. And a lot of the businesses that come to us have just never been able to break out of that ceiling. So we will go through your entire stack. I am looking for 2 more revenue share partners to work with over the next quarter. So if you think that you would be ready to work with us on that type of an agreement, just book a call with me down below. It's a 15-minute call. You will speak with me directly. And if I feel that your business is something that I would know how to scale, then we'll book a next call where we talk a lot more about the strategies of things. And if it's not, I'll be perfectly real with you. I'm not here to waste your time, certainly not here to waste my time. And I'm just looking for some businesses that of whom I've scaled in the past before so that we can bring some deals in a short period of time. So if that is you, be sure to click on the link below. I'm looking for our 2 next partners. Alright, if you've made it this far in the video, don't forget to hit like and don't forget to hit the subscribe button, because I put out new videos every single week, just how we book more opportunities off of platforms like LinkedIn and Meta for our B2B clients. All right, cheers.